Hey all there virtual rafters, thanks for clicking, and thank you to those who are returning from a previous video in the series about the storyline built within Raft. In a similar fashion, I'll walk through the story location and the points of interest where items can be found, and at the end a spoiler warning before getting into the contents of the notes or musing over what any of that might mean just for some fun. Trustworthy and I are back at sea. The final coordinates programmed into the receiver reveal that there's a bit of distance involved in our trip. Everyone's codes will be different, and you'll get new ones every time you start a new server, as maps are generated when you load up. So if you're taking breaks between all of this, be sure to check back on the journal for the receiver digits. On the way, pack for a while because the upcoming challenge is a huge rock landmass, accessible only by small beaches or inlets to a river that runs through a new autumn biome. Not only is there change in the hue and general appearance, there's some new collectibles here to get excited about. We can finally cross honey off the research list because these beautiful locales with their bright fall shades have a lot of bees, and they're kind of vicious. There'll also be a couple new varieties of trees, birch and pine, that are abundant on this destination of Balboa for you to start a crop of your own, in addition to the high amount of planks that they provide. Take your finest weapon because soon on arrival you'll find on the island residents the bears. If you happen to park on the beach as we did, the first bear that you'll encounter is Momma, the first boss-like enemy in the game. Nearby is a crate that requires 5 berries to distract the critter from her cave. Inside this cave is the items that you'll need to unlock the Machete pattern. Making one is going to come in handy later when you need to hack your way through to one of the communication stations, but these bears will be quite densely littered all over the place, and you can farm up plenty of leather, meat, and bear heads in the process of combing the land for the points of interest. So, be on the lookout for berries early on in exploring in this cool new island landscape so that we can distract Mama Bear from the cave later. Depending on which side of the island you've parked your raft on, one of the first sites that you'll find looks something straight out of an old movie Blair Witch Project. The path leading up to it from Mama Bear's cave has several notes, like the literal paper trail to a very odd site, with several more handwritten scraps to pick up for our traveler's journal. Who knows if this was meant to be a place of peace for someone? It's creepy as fuck for now, with what looks like metal mannequins, including one hanging from a tree with several heads and a multitude of limbs. Almost there with putting one's hand in a tank of full spiders grabbing these notes. There will be 5 in total around the grassy area. One mannequin contains a collectible item, which is a light bulb, and it's needed for a bonus quest in another location, so might as well pick it up now. Yellow signs posted along the path point to the directions in which players can find 4 objective points. They are the Ranger Station, in addition to Relay Stations 2, 4, and 6. We weren't going to get out of this without some kind of jumping puzzle annoyance. This time it's a pit of green sludge that does damage as a barrier near Station 2. But it's necessary to complete for the engine work on the ship with gas tanks, as the biofuel refiner blueprint is inside. It's worth searching around for these notes on the island. There's 12 to tell the story, but you'll need a wrench, hammer, and saw to collect all the notes for this location. Search around the wooded area above the signpost for a small workspace that includes a metal locker, and inside you'll find the saw. Relay Station 6 has the biofuel tank, and Station 2 the pipes that can connect your entire system together. Don't forget to make that machete before setting out for the path for Station 6, where we were headed first, as you'll need to gain this giant cutting tool to clear the cave of vines leading up to the relay station. There are 4 essential spots, but there's lots to find around the points of interest and the entire landscape before leaving. Given that it takes quite a few bee jars to make one beehive, it's worth trying to find every swarm that you can locate floating around in the air. Somewhere near, you're likely to find honeycombs attached to trees that will be high in demand to make that biofuel with all the parts that you're about to get blueprints for. Check all around station number 6 because there's some important documents found on the desks, including the fuel tank schematics and 2 notes. If you didn't already catch it on the way in the door, the wrench can be found on the table near the entrance. This is the first of 3 remote stations that must have its beacon activated in order to reveal the 4-digit code necessary to navigate to the next story location. They don't have to be done in any particular order as long as the 3 all get switched on. And once we've got everything, we can bounce up out of here for the next radio substation. Now that you've visited this place, more autumn biomes will start appearing as large islands in addition to the tropical biome that's been the entire game up until this point. It's still worth scrapping everything from the island possible to get projects for raft modification going while here. The blank yields from the autumn trees is a bit higher than the palms, and there's at least 3 to 4 places to capture bees or harvest honey. When pointing the rafts upstream with the power of the engines, this will put us on a path to spawn these colorful islands that now give us new variety. Approaching Station 4 is a wooden drawbridge that's been left suspended in the sky. The canyon is between us and the small red building, but it's not too difficult to solve this. If you have a bow and arrow on hand, those can be used, but there's also a collection of stones near the bridge that work in a pinch too. Launch a projectile towards the lever box located right next to the base of the bridge to jar it loose, dropping the bridge pretty violently, but it's intact for us to cross. Hustle up the stairs when peeking in the entrance, and there'll be a corkboard on the wall which has the fuel pipe blueprints pinned to it. Next to it is a map, and that's also a note for the story journal, so you'll want to take that too. Just to the side is a fuse box lever to power on the relay station. This should highlight the screen across the room behind you to let you know how many stations remain. Nearby is yet another note to help us figure out what happened to the people here, and don't forget the hammer tucked into the shelf near the display, as that's the final tool that you'll need for the quest chain. Whoever used to manage this tower sure was an avid reader. although it doesn't seem like there would be much else to do out here. There is also an upper floor to this small station, but no items were found, only melancholy silence of a place that appears to be abandoned quite some time ago. One more substation to go, headed now for number 2, where we find a pool of glowing green, weird acid sludge-like stuff. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it will do damage to characters' health bars. Once able to bypass this barrier, we get to the stairs to explore what could have been a very nice little hangout spot before it became overgrown with vines. Activating the electrical switch on the wall's fuse box should light up the screen, providing you with a 4-digit receiver code. You could write it down, but it will automatically record in your journal along with all the other notes and parts that you've been collecting. One of which is the locker next to the screen. When done exploring, run or hop down the stairs. Looking from the base, there will be a small cabin nearby with a sign above the door that reads, "If you lived here, your house is gone." This is the ranger station building and the final location for Balboa Island. The front steps have yet another creepy metal mannequin. It's actually the final resting place for the light bulb retrieved earlier out in the middle of the woods. This completes a bonus quest called Fix Errol, so we'll assume that that's Errol. Inside the cabin is a tool board on the wall with light silhouettes of missing items and the ones that you so happen to pick up along the way. But as you finish hanging the last tool, the entire setup shakes and falls to the ground, revealing behind it a photograph taped to the wall. This place is a disaster. But keep looking around for the refiner blueprints and bounce on the chair to grab the loot that's in the cubby loft in the upper part of the cabin. One last note is resting on the mattress in this closet-like small room. There's also some quite interesting newspapers plastered all over the windows of the ranger station that I'm pretty sure have to do with the story. I mean, developers probably don't just go to the links for nothing, especially when we can read the headlines. They're just filling in some more of the sentiments about what might have been happening at the time the world sunk. Don't forget to reinstall Errol's light bulb before going. But that crosses all the tasks off for the Balboa list. We've got a code and more questions. Getting into the storyline starts expanding the game nicely and provides a little suspense to the mix. Admittedly, I was springing up and down on the couch cheering, "We found it!" upon seeing the radio tower visible on the horizon when we first started this whole adventure. It generated some excitement not just for the progress, but to understand more of how we, as players, ended up on a raft in the middle of the ocean. If this happened to you, perhaps you could sympathize with how difficult it would be, given that the writings on the wall at the abandoned ocean tower, the solitude has been a bit maddening for Mike, whom we can gather kept it together for as long as he could before bailing. He left us some clues through his notes, one of the most compelling being a post-it note with the single word people and a question mark. The character at Balboa Island seemed to have progressed into an even more disturbing state after their stay out here without social connection. We'll get to that shortly. First, I wanted to drop some engine and biofuel tips. While engines will run on planks alone, with all these components, we're eager to get them running on a stockpile of biofuel because we're going to need to reach destinations that are against the current. Trustworthy and I set up a simple greenhouse to eventually fill with beehives as we obtain more jars of bees. The amount of honey generated is based on how many flowers are around for bees to feast on. 4 crop lots with 3 flowers each will provide the max 3 honeycombs per 8 in-game hours, and any hives placed around the flower boxes. There's a crafting menu item for the honey itself, which requires glass, so you'll finally have a reason to gather more sand from the bottom of the ocean again. Combining finished glass from the furnace with foodstuffs will get you the gas, and I do mean the kind that powers your boat. If it didn't pop in your head already, this means a ton of farming and puppy guarding your crops from birds. There's finally a use for all those animal heads beyond being wall trophies too. They can be tossed into the biofuel refiner along with fruits, vegetables, and fish. The balance of materials and uses is starting to come out fairly well. One thing to keep in mind is that one engine is required for every 100 raft foundations. If the engines seem to skip and sputter while on startup, it's probably because the raft is a little too big for just one. Throw another one on there. We're already going with 2. If it's not 100 foundations already, it will be shortly. This city isn't done by far. 6 engines will max out the power needs. Once you get at least that many running, you can build any size raft and the engines will still run it. A single biofuel container can power an engine for 12 minutes, about the same as a stack of planks of wood. For best efficiency fuel, it's best stored in tanks. This means running up to 48 minutes on one biofuel tank, or about 2 to 3 in-game days. One biofuel container can also charge up to 4 batteries, taking 185 seconds with 2 possible batteries on charge at a time. So here comes the spoilers, and thank you to those who are clicking away to discover the story on their own. Balboa Island has left us with 12 clues to its secrets, many of which are really small scraps of notes with very little written on them. However, there are some most curious too. They read, "Father has made up his mind a long time ago. He's going after the other one, and I'm going with him. Signed H." I wonder what the other one means, and if that's referential to any of the other characters in the whole story. There's some scribbling below. Any guesses as to what it might have said? The little slips of paper devolve into some stranger statements like, "The guilty lay restless. We must be punished if we are to rest. Signed B," who sounds like a disturbed person I once knew with that line. It suggests maybe that the isolation is playing a role. Another reads, "Not enough boat for all of us. I'm sorry." There's many guesses we could take at what occurred here, but perhaps some of the oddest sights on the island could also be considered. Were those real people or constructs of one person crafting some semblance of a society on their uninhabited island? Are the metal statues embodiments of these created characters? In the documents is a schedule. The arrow indicator points to an entry for December 7th through February 6th with tenants initial B and A Korea. The name matches with the caption on the photo in the journal on the opposite page. "Merry Christmas from nowhere," and the holiday would land within the time period. Close inspection, it looks like a couple sitting on top of a substation tower. All of these initials may reference the authors of these smaller slips of paper if we try to match up some of them. What's more interesting is that some of the initials also happen to line up with markings on the mechanical-looking mannequins. The multi-headed one hanging from a tree with the letters N, D, and L. Those initials left a note for us saying, "Father has a new favorite. We can't have that." We? Is that multiple personalities for the multiple sets of heads and limbs contained within the one hanging statue? Because that's just a bit creepy. Were these ever real people or just made up by a single occupant left on the island? On close inspection of each of the doll-like creations has an initial on it somewhere which corresponds to the scene playing out in the journal. Unfortunately, the much longer entries that may be radio transmissions didn't help make the story of Balboa much more clear. While they're considerably longer in content, they really only seem like more evidence that a single island occupant had started to lose grip on reality. The writer speaking to someone named Alberti, who left the first transmission in a log after stating that they left the boat for Bruno. We may assume that our deteriorating note-taker is Bruno, and these mannequins are his kids? Either real or imagined. It's possible because of what happens to the brain when extended periods without human contact. Here's more from that podcast that I featured in the Radio Tower episode of the series on Raft, Embedded Storyline. Playlist link for anyone wanting to revisit that discussion. But now let's get into the specifics of what happens to the brain, or why it could be relevant to what's happening here in Raft.
How does isolation actually change the brain?
So the brain consists of very responsive structures, particularly in terms of its nerve endings. The so-called synapses between nerve cells actually sprout every day and retract every night when you sleep, or remodel every night when you sleep, in fact, in response to the environment. So all the time that you're awake, you're constantly making new synaptic connections or reinforcing existing synaptic connections in ways that are adaptive to the environment in which you are actually in. So fundamentally, isolation, cutting off from the external world in any particular way, reduces brain function on an ongoing basis. So your brain, literally, in its synaptic connections, shrinks during those particular periods. So our mental health and our physical health depends on interaction with the social environment. So isolation is a fundamentally challenging concept, more or less not nurturing, not sustaining your actual central nervous system, your brain, and the way it functions. It's very contrary to normal human existence.
And things get even worse if you add sensory deprivation to the mix.
So if you go for total sensory deprivation, you lose the light-dark cycle. You lose any input from the external world, which normally regulates daily brain function. Then the brain does its own business. It starts to still be active. So the danger being, it starts to create phenomena in the absence of that external cues. So the chance that you do hallucinate, hear things, see things, experience things that are not in the external world is increased in any such situation.
That raises the question of how extreme forms of isolation, like solitary confinement, further impact the brain and mental health.
So the issue with prisoners of war, torture, where social deprivation, social isolation has been used as a punishment or as a torture, isn't the same as voluntarily going into isolation or quarantine to protect yourself or those people you care about or the society more broadly. So humans' social purpose actually matters to the brain and the human response to this, where there was distinct intent to cause harm. In those situations, you see post-traumatic stress, you see much greater psychological distress, much greater disruption. You do see the short-term effects. People often become delirious. They can't tell reality from the real situation. They will often hallucinate in that situation with complete disruption of their sleep-wake cycle. What becomes obvious is the short-term effects are dramatic in terms of loss of control over normal brain function, but subsequently, clearly the main effects of that are then in the post-traumatic situation. So the effects on those individuals are not short-term. They are then damaged long-term by exposure to those periods, again, depending on the severity and the duration of the actual exposure.
And who knows how long the note's author was on this island, probably by themselves, suffering in delusion and possibly hallucinations. The recollections left for us could even be auditory hallucinations of people who don't actually exist. There's a joke reference in the log entries about one guy, two paychecks after all. It follows a line of more desperate dialogue to a person named Alberte who seems to be on this island somewhere, leaving behind tools and a ragged harness, and none of this sounds very good. What I'm curious about, that could tie into the greater overall storyline, is the lines at the very beginning of the log. Inhabitant Bruno reports getting into contact with someone, perhaps someone from the Navy, but a language barrier kept the conversation from being much substance. There's something about not receiving because number 6 was underwater. Does that mean a radio tower? Could it have been the first location that we visited in the story? It was abandoned with a portion of it already sunk under the water. There's also a Station 6 on Balboa, but it doesn't appear to be sunk. Bruno then goes on to mention that number 3 being gone, and that he's not very angry about it. But I think he probably is, though, because it's all in caps. It starts going downhill from there. It's hard to know exactly where he was going with these logs that he left behind. It's like he's telling a tale of what played out on the island, but for all we know it did, or these are just craft dolls or some kind of memorial. But then again, it could mostly be hallucinations from the effect of social isolation. It's hard to know for sure. What we can somewhat gather from the end of the logs is that Bruno has taken at least one of the island occupants, or mannequins, along with him on the boat. Will we ever hear from Bruno again? I've gotta say, there's a lot of sad moments in this story. Some quite possible realities that would be faced under the circumstances and challenges that we may not always consider would be the biggest threats. Ourselves, our brains. Lack of being able to chill with another human being can be every bit as dangerous as high water, disease, bears, and billionaires. Raft has them all, and I'm very glad that I have the privilege of spending my time rafting with Trustworthy. Although I can play this game plenty by myself, and I have been building oodles in creative mode to share on the playlist, multiplayer just makes the entire thing better. This marks the end of the first chapter at Raft. We've got Autumn Biome Islands open, and we're going to set sail to the current so we can come across them on our journey, or, if you want to, you can punch in the code for the receiver because you just can't wait to get to the next part of the story. We did, and now we played through the whole second time while I pieced together these guides. There's more story walkthroughs on the way for Chapter 2, and I'm just going to go build another raft because bored. Hopefully this was helpful in getting your items, and that you have a good rest of your day. Take care, y'all, and bye-bye!